Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Why Marketing Messages Succeed and Fail, the fact and fiction behind AI's next best action. As the title suggests, we're going to be talking about how marketers can really meet the mark as it relates to personalized, relevant messages to their consumers and how they can leverage AI to do so. I'm going to be your host today. My name is Sally Lopez. I head up marketing programs and operations at the CMO Council. We're a peer-powered network of marketing leaders. I am joined by my co-host and subject matter expert today, Erin Meiji, who's a VP and General Manager for MoEngage. We are also joined by 3 featured speakers today, and I'm really excited to be digging into an open panel discussion with these folks as we get a little bit deeper into the webinar. We have Bob Park, who's the Chief Brand Officer at GE Appliances, Sumeet Grover, who's Chief Digital and Marketing Officer at Alliant, also responsible for all communications. So got a lot of responsibilities under his belt. And then we've got the VP of Product at AudioMac, Mr. Charlie Kaplan. Really thrilled to have our 3 speakers with us today as we go through all of this. So to set the stage, tell us a little bit about MoEngage, what MoEngage does, and why personalization is so critical. I'm going to pass it over to Erin. Erin, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Good to be with you. To kind of set, as Sally said, set the stage, set a little bit of context for why we think this topic is very, very interesting. We've actually got a product that's an insights-led customer engagement platform. And what that means is MoEngage ultimately helps our customers, which are B2C brands, get into this mode of taking customer data, processing it in certain ways, segmenting it in certain ways, listening, if you will, to that data, and then being able to engage the end consumer or end customer with messaging, right? That might be SMS, it might be push notifications through a mobile device, it might be email. So essentially really just taking data, using that data to communicate with customers and engaging customers with that kind of communication. That's what we do. So, and obviously as we help customers do that, we are all the time talking about this concept of personalization, right? So you can see the stats here. I don't think anybody would disagree that when it comes to personalization, like that's the thing. And honestly, it goes beyond just, hey, can I personalize to a giant group? Can I use the word first name? It really gets into how do I think about where they are in place and time? Where are they at in their journey? How do I segment my customers in the best possible way? And ultimately, the ultimate goal is how do we get to kind of this one-to-one personalization, right? Right message, right time, right place. So anyway, that's what I'm going to talk about today. And again, personalization is an aspect to this. We're going to talk too about how AI can help. So Sally, back over to you.
Great. So when we talk about personalization, that's not only meeting folks with messages that are relevant, that are targeted, but also it means meeting them in their channel of choice. It means not creating a confused experience, repeating messages, triggering someone with a message that's completely irrelevant and may have been relevant to them 2 weeks before. We at the CMO Council did a consumer study that asked 2,000 consumers worldwide, do you find it frustrating to repeat yourself in multiple channels? No surprise there. 87% said yes, they find that frustrating. Frankly, I'm surprised it's not 100%. But the big question that we asked was, has that frustration led you to question doing business with that brand? And 73% said yes. And what we have to understand as digital marketers today is that it is so much easier for consumers to defect. And so it's critical that we get this right. At the same time, we know that marketers today are really working to improve their customer lifetime value and really drive those meaningful relationships forward. And we asked the marketers in our audience what they thought the most important requirements were in order to improve LTV. They said humanizing connections and aligning the organization were both absolutely critical. So remembering that it's actually a human at the end of your campaign, right? Rather than just thinking about the campaign, making sure that all customer-facing points of the organization are aligned and that all of the organization is aligned so that folks aren't hearing one message from communications, a different from sales, different from customer service, right? And then, of course, to offer a product or a service that actually meets the needs of said consumer. To succeed in 2022, marketers must deepen engagement. We asked marketers what their future plans were to achieve that goal. And they said, number one, they needed a unified view of the customer. Number two, they really needed to create those lasting connections with customers. And number three, they needed to create more dynamic customer brand experiences. But in order to do this, they need the right data. And unfortunately, that remains an issue for marketers today. 55% of our marketers are saying that aggregating the right data for a robust view of the customer is the most significant challenge they face in maximizing their customer lifetime value. So how do we address this? First of all, we need to align around what are the most important areas of strategic focus. And our marketers said that number one area that they are focusing on is improving their customer journey from acquisition through conversion and beyond. Number two is to really plan around digital growth. We know that today we are digital dominant. And while there's many aspects of folks desiring to go back into person, we know that digital is here to stay. And a lot of these aspects of digital engagement will only continue to grow. Number three, the ability to actually measure the impact of those campaigns. Marketers today are expected to be able to drive measurable growth. And in order to do that, they need to be able to actually measure the impact of their actions. To achieve all of this, 69% of the marketers in our audience said that they are investing more in marketing technology to improve these areas. So I'm going to kick it back to you, Erin. What we understand is that marketers need data, but they need to be able to pull that data and align that data so that they actually create something meaningful, right? Where there's no shortage of data, but how do we get to the point where we're actually taking meaningful action from that data?
Yeah. Sally, I think we jumped a slide.
We jumped a slide. I will take us back to where we need to go.
Yeah. I think that would probably the AI in the machine that was doing that. They thought that we
that was definitely AI.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you said, you know, with mountains and mountains of data, sometimes how do you make sense of it all, right? You've got a lot of options. Sometimes the only way to do it is let the computer essentially go to work and sort through it. When we talk to marketers about using AI, right now, though, we haven't seen a lot of folks, and again, that doesn't mean this doesn't happen, but I'm just thinking about, like, what's a practical application of AI? It's some of these things that we have here on the screen. So it's thinking about, like, okay, can I take some content that I've created and maybe make a few different versions of it and have the computer figure out which one is the best, right? Or can I figure what's the right time to deliver a certain type of communication, or who are the people that I should target with this kind of a message because they're kind of in that right sweet spot for maybe about ready to purchase, or on the negative side, maybe they're kind of exhibiting behavior that says they're about ready to churn and leave us as a brand and defect to some other brand. So, you know, not that again, there aren't people out there that are dumping these huge data lakes into an AI engine and coming up with this really awesome insight. But right now, where we see, again, the practical application is literally just augmenting. Sometimes we call it actually augmented intelligence, taking what a marketer already knows and let them kind of optimize hunches. Let them take the AI and let them make decisions for them and kind of predict what's going to happen. So obviously we talked about data. One of the things we see all the time is there's this need in an organization to break down the silos. And what I mean by silos, I said a lot of times, I mean, let's take retail, for example, right? First, it started out with direct mail, and that was a communication channel. So it's like, okay, there's data that sits in some kind of a system that's like name, address, phone number. Then you jump into email, and that becomes now a channel. And a lot of times the way these things are organized, it's like, okay, well, now let's create a team that works on email. And then there's a team that works on direct mail. Now there's a team that works on mobile. And you guys see how this is all going, right? All of a sudden, we're kind of, as different channels come into popularity and adoption by the end consumer, like we see brands have organized their company a lot of times around channels, and that's creating these data silos. There's no unified view of the customer. And I think that the point I'm trying to illustrate, I know we all know this, But a lot of this really comes down to a cultural change internally about how are we going to work together? Either how are we going to create a layer across all those different teams, or how are we going to create some cultural habits about reaching across the aisle, so to speak, and making sure that we're trading information. Even if it's something as simple as like, hey, every week, every team is going to upload a CSV into some master system. I'm not saying it has to be complicated, but the point here is sometimes it's an organizational or cultural shift that has to happen to actually make sure that data is being presented. The other thing too is when you get this data, right, and you think about where it's sitting in your organization, maybe even what silos it's in. Here are a couple different places to look, right? Look in your loyalty system, look in your mobile app. What analytics tools do you have? What surveys are you collecting information on? And then we also think in this dimension as well, not only what are user properties, again, I talked about like direct mail days where you've got name, address, phone number, email, you've got the email address and maybe a first name, but also what's the behavioral data, right? What are they doing as they navigate your site or navigate your mobile app? What other information do you have on the individual that maybe you can even append just because you know where they're coming from and you know the general demographic snapshot of a particular geographic area? And again, like I said, geographical data. Like you know they're in Atlanta versus they're in San Diego. And then ultimately pull all of this information together into the single view of the customer. That's going to make so much easier for you. And again, I keep encouraging everybody, don't think that has to be some 2-year giant CDP type of implementation. It certainly can be, but sometimes it can be really, really simple because ultimately you're trying to get to is this, that 360-degree view of the customer. And you've got properties, you've got data, you've got actions, you've got the interactions with the campaign. And when you start to get this information, this is now when you can start applying logic and AI to help you be more effective in, again, right time, right place messaging. Okay, the other piece in this equation too, and we can't forget about this, but it has to be said, you have to have access to the customer. So if you don't have an email address or don't have an opt-in, you can't send them an email, right? You've got to be able to, maybe you want to be able to reach out to them and deliver some kind of message. Sometimes right now, the only thing you might have would be like ad networks or social, an ad on Facebook or an ad on Instagram. Maybe you've got a pop-up on their website that you can deliver. The point here is always you think about the data and you think about the behavioral data and all the triggers that allow you to create messaging. It's like, well, you've got to be able to communicate and send a message or engage in a two-way dialogue with your customer. And so that's a piece of this equation too. All right, so let's talk about the journey. So we know that marketers are focused on like, how do I improve that acquisition to, whatever it is in the future? It could be that customer acquisition to where they make their first payment. It could be that customer acquisition to their third purchase, for example. What is that customer journey and what does that look like? So now we're going to talk about how do you use some of the tools that are out in the market today to make that process of understanding what the customer journey is and where you place those steps along the journey, just so that it's not all guesswork. And again, you can use data, analytics, and other tools to do that. This is where AI comes in. And once again, if you guys remember, I was saying the people that we see using this very practically are thinking about like using AI to help with these decisions. What's the best time to send something, right? For an individual, when do they most likely are going to respond, right? We have a golfing app as a customer, 18 birdies. They know that Saturday mornings is the best time for them to send an email because that's when people are thinking about, should I go golfing today or should I not? If they send it on a Tuesday, guess what? It gets forgotten. The other thing is, okay, what's the best channel? Is it email? Is it push? Is it SMS? Like again, using AI, you'll be able to understand, and again, the computer will automatically be able to figure out for you what's the best channel to send a certain message on. Then also too, what's the best message? Is it an upsell? Is it a retention message? Is it hey, this is a product that could complement something you've recently purchased? And then ultimately too, what's the best device to send that on? And when you start, I think we all understand, we start adding in all this complexity, it really helps to just as a marketer, think more strategic and say like, okay, I know I want to send this at the best possible time. I know I want to send the best possible message. Let's let the computer help me figure out what those things are. And essentially, once again, augment what I'm doing. Think Iron Man, right? When you're talking about augmentation. You put on that exoskeleton and you can do superhuman things. All right, so here's some of the other tools that we see used quite a bit. Now this one on the screen here actually isn't AI. It's something that we've got in our product that customers use a lot, and it really comes down to user path analysis. And these tools are available on a number of other analytics platforms, right? But being able to see like, okay, at the point in this example of install, what happens? What's the user journey look like? What are the different paths that they're taking? And when you can start to at least use analytics to start giving you a rough idea of where to focus, then you can say, okay, we're really going to point our AI and our data collection into these areas because we think if we can get people to take this path and not that path, we're going to be more successful, or we're going to get better results. So again, we're huge advocates for using tools like this to do the analysis. The other thing too we're a huge fan of is RFM analysis. Once again, using what I call standard kind of out-of-the-box tools like RFM that aren't necessarily AI, but it allows you to at least make a little bit more sense of this massive amount of data and start figuring out, okay, where can I spend my time and attention? You know, in the case of RFM analysis, right, you can do things like, okay, let's figure out who our loyal users are, who are the ones that are hibernating, who are the ones that are about ready to flip to loyal. So can we give them a special offer? Can we do something at that point in time to get them to flip to that category? Or do we know that somebody's about ready to churn and they need some attention? So using tools like this really allows you to kind of, again, create that rough-in plan where you can focus your attention on marketing and on the consumers you're trying to engage. Okay, kind of building on the logical tools, now we're starting to get into more of the AI and what's possible. So in this example, right, I'm talking about journey orchestration. Again, there are a number of tools out there that do that. Really what this allows you to do as a marketer is start to really make sense of like, okay, let's think about these sequences. You know, what criteria means that somebody enters a sequence? You know, is it an installation or is it a first purchase, right? If they made their first purchase, what are the things that you want them to see or do or experience over the next 30 days after they've made their first purchase? And what's nice here is you can use these journey orchestration tools to create logical flows and really try to start to craft in, or I guess rough in again, that user journey. But what's cool is once you get that roughed in, this is where you can start using artificial intelligence to optimize your hunches. So it's things like, in this example, I know the screen is hard to see, but really what we're demonstrating here is that user journey, but we're branching it. So what we're actually having our customers do is they're branching user journeys and they're saying, hey, computer, figure out of these like 6 different paths that a user could take, which one gets me the best business result? Whether that's a purchase or whether that's a download or that's a sign up to a loyalty program. And then again, you can do things like, okay, on path 1, you're like, we're going to do this via email if you've got email. On this path, we're going to do this only via social ad. Maybe this path, we do it via email, but we're also going to follow it up with a second email. And again, this is where you can start using AI to really take your instincts as a marketer and optimize for them automatically. And then you learn, and then you readjust, and then you do it again. And then the cycle repeats itself. The other thing too, that we're starting to experiment with in our platform and customers as well, is making predictions, right? When we start seeing customers get their hands on more data, now they've got some really interesting things they can do because it creates breadcrumbs, right? They create more touch points along a digital engagement or an engagement with your brand from digital touch points. So now you can start making a guess, and the computer can do that and say, okay, how likely is it that this person is going to end up at a purchase? Or how likely is it this person's going to subscribe? Or how likely is it that this individual, after they do these things, is going to churn or no longer engage with our brand? So start using that data, actually use the AI to make predictions of what's actually going to happen. And again, we're starting to see some really, really great results early on with this. This is brand new stuff for us. But again, once you get the data into the system, then all of a sudden it opens up this whole world for you. Okay, so we know that not everybody can start out the gate all the way, right? I think that the analogy I use is I've known people that, at the start of the new year, here we are, They're like, I'm getting a trainer this year. I'm going to get fit. I've got a trainer and I'm going to train 7 days a week for an hour and a half. And we all know, hey, that seems great in concept. And then you start to do it and you realize, holy crap, I can't, I mean, there's no way that I can sustain this, right? So you got to think, what are those baby steps? What's the first step? What's that 1 day a week at the gym look like? And then what's the 2 days a week? And what's the 3 days a week? So we try to kind of bucket where we see folks taking this natural kind of path, if you will. And I'm going to pull a few of these out of here and kind of give you a demonstration of what I'm talking about. The first one is channels, right? Like, okay, if you've got a set of customers that are on email, ask yourself, how do I get them to adopt a second channel? How do I get them to download my app? How do I get them to opt into SMS? What value can I offer them to let me engage them on another channel? And so we see that as a common practice, like channel expansion strategy, right? Really thinking about how do you expand the number of ways you can reach out to a customer and make sure that it's valuable to them to do that. The other thing, A/B testing, right? So right now I've encountered a lot of customers who are like, hey, I'm trying to do so many things, create user journeys, et cetera. Like, I don't even have time to think of that next dimension when it comes to like, okay, I'm sending a sequence of 3 onboarding emails. How do I A/B test this? Because it just takes me so much effort to get to these 3 onboarding emails. And the message that we give is like, hey, you know what? Just copy that version that you're starting with and change the subject. It's that simple. Maybe add an emoji to the original one. And if you can start there, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well then that was easy. And I kind of get into that habit of doing that with every time I create an email, I just create a copy and I maybe tweak the subject line and then I let the computer kind of tell me which one is performing the best. And then start maybe making 3 or 4 copies. And then let AI start figuring out for you, like, okay, which one is the best performer? And you know, the thing is with this kind of content A/B testing, I've even seen it used by a media company to really test out headlines in advance of, you know, really picking a permanent headline for a certain story. They might have an early list of people who like to get breaking news alerts, and they'd send like 6 different headlines out to see which got the most engagement. And then ultimately they pick which headline performs the best. And then on the website, that's the headline that they change it to. So for the folks that come to the website in the evening or after, 12 hours after the news breaks, they're most engaged with that. And that's a great way to use, A/B testing to really inform not only what's happening within that channel, let's say email, but also apply that to, what's happening in other aspects of your business. And then of course, using journey orchestration to do things like, okay, well, where and when are we sending this? What channel are we sending these information? I mean, a user journey could start out with, I'm going to send an email and then I'm going to do an automated follow-up. Could be that simple, right? And then that's 2 steps. The next one could be 3 steps, 4 steps. You guys get the idea. The point here is get into the habit of just repetition. And that motion, if you will, you start to like add something new, something super small every week. And over time, you will drive adoption, you will drive movement through these stages and ultimately drive more maturity. So Sally, that's my take on this. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to this slide, but certainly I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Aaron. I love this slide because, as you said, it's impossible to go from 0 to hero. And at the same time, everybody in the audience and even on this panel may be at different stages, right? And so how do we actually think about getting to the next level, continuing to grow, continuing to optimize? Erin, before we move into the panel discussion, an audience question did come in that I thought it would be great if you could add a little bit of color to.
Sure.
The question is AI-driven optimization about analyzing what has worked in the past, e.g. greatest transactions resulting from X channels, Y time of day, etc., or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, honestly, we see it as like optimizing in real time. So like we might see a and again, this works it can work in a broadcast scenario, right? Where you're sending out a bunch of email and let's say you've got 3 different versions of it, right? You want AI to essentially figure out, well, which one's what's going to get me the best, return on my send, right? Well, that might be a purchase or there might be some kind of engagement with a landing page or something, right? But when it comes to user journeys, right, we see it really used as to like pick the best path, like pick the best path based on what's happening in real time. So over time, essentially the computer is telling you, hey, here's the path that's working the best. Here's what's getting the best response. And taking historical data, again, not that you can't go into historical databases and say, hey, let's run some analysis with some kind of different tools. But what we see is like, okay, if you've got any best practices or any insights that you have from the past that say like, hey, this really works for me, you can use AI to essentially challenge that and say like, okay, we know that, for example, this particular piece of email content works really, really well when we send it at this point in time in the buyer's journey. Why don't we let's let AI tell us if we modify that content, right? Or we send it at a different time, or if we change the sequence in which maybe we break it up into three different emails instead of one. That's where we see folks really using it, is like as it's happening, AI is ultimately making the decisions versus, doing a bunch of analysis and then doing some kind of running a campaign based on that. I hope that helps.
Awesome. I think that's a great response. Wonderful. So let's transition into our panel discussion so we can hear from our panelists a little bit about their experiences as it relates to personalization, digital engagement, and AI. So welcome, panelists. Great to see all of you. I'm going to start with just a level setting question, which is really, what does digital engagement look like to you? What are some of those new channels that are taking storm? And how has this perhaps shifted your marketing priorities? I'd love to start with you, Sumit, because I know you have shifted to full digital, and that has created certainly some challenges, but also unique opportunities as it relates to customer engagement today. So why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Sally, and thanks for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. Digital engagement is key, right? So you mentioned Aligned Credit Union as an example, our organization. We are 100% digital. We are 100% digital financial institution, no branches. So what does it mean when you ask what does digital engagement look like? And the fact is that digital engagement is engaging with our consumers at the individual level with hyper-personalized, relevant, and timely communications that make them feel compelled to stay engaged in the channels that are digital only. Now, Erin, you touched on a couple of things here, and Sally, you did as well earlier, that we talk about personalization, cross-channel, and omni-channel integration. We talk about responsive, adaptive design. What we need to also focus on is that intelligent marketing has to move beyond awareness, reach, and conversion. And that's where the focus has to be on the entire customer journey in the digital channel itself, looking at every single design touch point, engagement strategy, and ensuring that experience the customer has through those channels are flawless and frictionless. Hope that helps. I know you had other components to your questions. Let me know if you want me to touch on what channels are taking storm.
I'd love to hear from your perspective before we jump in with our additional panelists, because we've certainly seen at the CMO Council, we did a consumer study in 2019 versus 2020, where chatbots were at the bottom of the list in 2019 in terms of something consumers wanted to use, and they skyrocketed in 2020 as customers started using them more and realizing, hey, you know what, I can actually self-serve a little bit using these, and this is actually useful to me, right? So are you seeing some of those shifts?
Absolutely, but it has to be done right, Sally. That's critical. Chatbots, if done right, are an amazing capability. Yeah. If not done right, they can be a huge disruption creators. When we think about channels that are taking storm, we think about influencers via social channels still being in vogue. We actually have had a very, very successful relationship with some influencers from a marketing perspective at Alliant. And we are seeing that consumers gravitate towards that. We're also seeing amazing posts around Instagram or TikTok or other channels when we think about it. But the fact that consumers have too many options, and they feel overwhelmed on which app, on which social media platform, which influencer, and what product or service to try next. In fact, you'll be surprised that a lot of members feel confused in terms of what all the subscriptions we are paying for. How do we clarify and make that simpler? So in this age of streaming, where households have moved away from traditional cable, the marketing landscape has changed. We are focused on OTT, we are focused on CTV, and we are focused on chats. But let's be very clear that as we think about enhancing personalization in these channels, cookie elimination will have us enhance first-party data collection and work with partners that can do contextual advertising at scale across these channels. So the focus is across the board. A lot of channels to work through. Erin highlighted some of them, but we have to do it right.
Absolutely. Bob, why don't you jump in here? Because as coming from the perspective of GE Appliances, and obviously GE, huge brand, legacy brand, huge reputation, a lot at stake in terms of getting it right and getting those engagements right. What are you seeing as it relates to digital engagement today?
I think digital engagement has evolved. It's interesting that the conversation today is a lot around AI and personalization. Personalization is absolutely key, especially in terms of the way that consumer preferences have evolved pre-pandemic and now during the pandemic and even post-pandemic. So over the last 10 years, it's evolved and now it continues to change. So you need to be able to be nimble to be able to speak to those consumers and be where the consumers expect you to be. If they want to use a chatbot or if they don't, if this, then that. There's so many different variables involved. And the key is really how I see engagement is it's like walking through a market. Everybody's got their tomatoes and potatoes and all their different bread, et cetera, out in there, and they're attempting to sell you something. And there's a lot of voices, a lot of white noise. And if you're doing engagement right digitally, you're cutting through that. And you're coming up with a compelling piece of content. You're educating them somehow to basically come in and check out your stall. And it's really, really difficult to do if you've ever walked through a market before on a Saturday morning. That's what it's like. So really, items like personalization and AI help you cut through that clutter to streamline and target. And I think that's really a key moving forward, if that makes sense.
I love the analogy. And to your point, especially when we know that humans today have less of an attention span than a goldfish, we've gotta make sure we're actually cutting through that noise, to your point. Now, Charlie, at AudioMac, you were born digital, right? So there was no shifting of priorities per se into a digital world. But talk to me a little bit about what that looks like and what that means to you. And even within that context, if you've seen shifts over the last couple of years in terms of how you need to engage.
For sure, Sally, and thank you for having me on the panel. So it's true, AudioMac is about 10 years old, and we began as a website, and then in the last 5 years, launched an app which has become by far the dominant source of traffic for the platform. And AudioMac exists within a very quickly growing corner of sort of the overall music landscape, which is the creator economy. So AudioMac, unlike a lot of streaming services you may be familiar with, is a place both where listeners can listen and also where artists can upload their own music. And so our objective, or sort of our philosophy around what marketing really is for us as a company, is simply to enable the artists on our platform to be as successful as possible, getting their fans to listen to their music. So when we talk about it internally, we think of ourselves as the tech stack for the artist, and that the artist is our marketing team. And the more successful we can be, and Aaron mentioned this in the slide deck, more successful we can be in truly providing useful tools for the artist, the more successful they will be to get folks to listen to their music, and therefore the more successful AudioMac will be in getting folks on the platform. And so much of how we think about our marketing has to do with utility to the artists themselves. But there's a cold start problem there. How do you get the artists in the very first place to build out a fan base that ultimately is going to sustain them and get them to incentivize to continue to grow? And that is partly where personalization plays in on our platform. So we have externalized personalized marketing, but we also have personalization within our service itself. Immediately upon joining the app, we recommend you artists that you should check out based on your music taste and on your location. And what that does is kind of siphon users towards the artists ultimately who are going to take them up and send them in-app notifications, send them push notifications, send them emails, and sort of drive the greater objective of building a really vibrant music community on the platform.
I'm so glad that you brought up personalization, because I wanted to go there next, Charlie. So why don't we stay with you for a minute here and talk a little bit more about that? Because, and I know, Erin, you and I were talking about some consumer research that you had done over at MoEngage around what does personalization really mean to folks today. And obviously, you know, we know that it means more than just having their first name embedded into their email, right? It really needs to be so much more profound than that. To your point, Charlie, you know, really thinking about relationship building as it relates to personalization. One of the challenges we've seen, and in fact, in a survey back about a year and a half ago or so, we found at the CMO Council, marketers admitted to us that they were oftentimes forgetting about the person at the end of their campaign. They were so in execution mode of just get this campaign done, make sure that we've got all of our drip campaigns set up, now push it out and like let it go and forget about it. And they were forgetting that there's actually a human at the other end of that campaign that's receiving that campaign. So what are some of the steps that you take to really make sure that you're focusing in on what personalization aspects really matter to your consumers? If you could dig into that a little bit, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, it's a really critical question, and I think that not just within marketing, but sort of more broadly in our strategy as a company, we're really committed to this empirical style of thinking, which is to say, make sure you know what you really know. If you're going to launch a new feature, if you're going to launch a marketing campaign, how are you going to define what success for that might be? So if your objective is to get more folks ultimately to buy a particular product or to follow a particular user, if you're not measuring that, then ultimately you can't even tell if you worked on the right thing. And then is it a waste of resources, or can you tout how good of a job you did? So everything's got to begin, I think, with just that kind of epistemological understanding of, do we know what's going on here? That's the very first step. What that should then turn into, or what the sort of next step that should take you to, is an understanding of the metadata that's available to you about your users. So how can you characterize them? So we're a music service, right? Folks come to the platform, and like all services, they'll give us their geolocation. They may give us their age or their gender, but because we're a music service, as they start playing music, you know, each music object has an artist name, a song name, a genre attribute. Maybe it came through a playlist. You know, in aggregate, these pieces of information give you the indicators that will substantiate what your personalization strategy can be. And the more you get folks to tell you, especially very, very early on, but over time, the more you can ultimately leverage that information to give them the content that is going to satisfy them. So AudioMac is in kind of an interesting position, right? Because it's not just about us marketing to users. It's actually many users, artists, marketing to many users, listeners. And sometimes those roles are kind of blurred. An artist can be a listener and vice versa. And so it's critically important that both sides of that are kind of operating on the same playing field, that the attributes that describe how people listen, the genre they like or their location, are also relevant to the attributes which describe the artist themselves, because that's how you make the recommendation between the two. It's also how you recommend songs or albums. You figure out what time of day to send people music. The list goes on and on. But I hope that you know, sort of that serves as sort of largely allegorical, because I think any service, you know, has a sort of a core use case that makes them valuable to their customers, and core sort of attributes, pieces of metadata about their customers, which they can then leverage into personalization and find more and more specific ways to meet their users where they are.
I think that the example that you brought up, and this is why I love also having different industry perspectives, because that's so specific to your industry, but it's something that we can all take something away from, right? What are folks actually listening to? Not just like, oh, I'm a white woman in my mid-30s, what might I like? Right? So you're probably not going to jump on Spanish pop, but that's all me, right? Um, so,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. You need to look at what people are actually doing. That's how you
what they're
really tell what
actually
they're into.
doing, right? Not just putting them into these buckets and drawing drastic conclusions based on those buckets. Those certainly do not work anymore. Now, Sumit, I know, being in financial services, there's another aspect too that needs to be taken into consideration through all of this, which is privacy. And how do we balance that relevant, personalized, contextual engagement with making people feel really secure about their data and how that engagement is all working, because it's all interconnected. So I'd love for you to jump in on this.
Sure, absolutely. And Charlie, great points you made there. And a lot of them do apply across industries. But Sally, this is great. One of the considerations when we talk about personalization is privacy and security. There's a very fine line between helpful and invasive. That's easy to cross, when you're talking money, and it varies from person to person. For example, we need to be very mindful of the channel. We found that customers have varying appetite for how much information is shown in an email or a mobile app, in case they're viewing it in public. So we do have to take that into account. Many people derive self-worth from their finance. So, offering unsolicited advice, especially if it pertains to topics like debt consolidation, can be unwelcome, or it can even feel like shaming. Now, some of the data we have on the members, like credit card balances as reported by the bureaus, might lack context. Are they revolving a balance, or did they just do a spend specific to this month? And that's where we need to be very smart about it. Personalization interacts with advice, regulations, and trustworthiness. Is this good advice from me? So if you think about it, my personal financial institution should be giving me good advice, and I'll take that into account. And if there is a lack of personalization, that's going to break a member's trust. And that's where it becomes key for us to extremely focus on privacy, security, and other considerations to ensure that personalization is done right.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Now, Bob, you hold the keys to the brand, right? And you are focused on the perspective of the brand. And nowadays, that is very much intertwined with the messaging from the brand, how that brand is communicating, how they're interacting and engaging with customers. So from the perspective of the brand, how do you think about personalization?
I think it's really about meeting expectations. So the brand always goes in, any brand goes in with a strategy on what they want the customer, the consumer base to see them as. So how you personalize has to communicate that to consumer, and you would expect that you would be able to attract the right consumers that way. What's really important with personalization from a durable goods standpoint, so from a home appliance standpoint, is it's not a product that you're looking at every day or every week or even every month or year. It's years before you consider a new appliance purchase. So the data management is actually quite massive, as you've got new consumers entering, new home buyers, et cetera, entering, people retiring and leaving, downsizing, and they don't make a purchase decision every day. They're making them every X amount of years. So keeping a track of their preferences, which are also changing, there's a lot of data involved in getting to that point where you're finding the right personalization or the right messaging, the right conduit or channels to speak to that consumer becomes paramount. And then you throw in things like pandemic and stuff that changes everything entirely around. One of the interesting things that's happened lately is people are moving to more rural areas due to the pandemic. That working from home is now more of a thing. And how's that affected kitchen renovations? So for us, it's actually been extremely good, but now you have to tailor your messaging to that consumer. So a lot of different aspects, depending on what industry you're in terms of how you want to personalize. So having a solution to do that is paramount.
I think that's such a good point, and it also brings us back to the long-standing customer relationships, right? Because to your point, people are not buying a new refrigerator every day. But I want that person to continue to come back to you when the time comes for them to get their next appliance, really creating that long long-standing, relevant relationship. It's not a one and done, right? It's not something where, okay, I'm going to sell them and then I'm going to quickly upsell them. I'll quickly upsell them again, and try to reel them in. It's okay, I've got one big sale. Now, how can I nurture this relationship in a way where I'm not just constantly pitching them products that they don't need, right? I love it. All right, let's talk a little bit about AI and the reason why we're all here today, and then how we can actually use AI to help us achieve some of these goals. So I'm going to start with Charlie. I know you are using AI. What's your perspective on it? How are you using it? What's some of the kind of foundational pieces that need to be in place in order to make the most out of it? Could you kick us off?
For sure, yeah, and it's a great question because artificial intelligence has so many applications, and there's so much innovation happening around artificial intelligence right now that it can fit into almost any piece of a digital product, to not only to make it more personalized, but to sort of tune it to changing preferences for a user, which is really it's a fascinating field to look into. For us, one of the biggest investments we've made in artificial intelligence has been in specifically in song recommendations, which is a critical part of what we do. Users show up and they either know what they want or they don't. And if they don't know what they want, then we really have to do a lot of work to help them, which can make the experience kind of seem eerily smooth. So definitely the outcome that we're looking for. But at the same time, it's also a sort of an important feature about how we contact users, which, I mean, we are a MoEngage customer, and artificial intelligence being a component of, for example, when to deliver a message, knowing when a user starts to use their phone during a day versus when they stop using their phone during the day, is really, really critical. So I'll break that down just a little bit because I don't want to sort of seem like this is like a one-size-fits-all solution. So messaging users is critical because we all have email inboxes, and we know what happens in the morning when you've logged in versus by the end of the day when you've had time to go through everything. Stuff that shows up when you're not looking at it can very easily get lost. And that sort of applies in all kinds of different cases, in push notifications and in-app notifications, artificial intelligence, and being able to sort of tell, okay, let's pay attention to, on an individualized basis, what the activity of your user is really important, really valuable to leverage. But at the same time, it's not always the only way to think about reaching out to a user. So I'll give you an example of that. As I mentioned, on Audio Mac, artists upload music, but it's also where listeners listen to music. So notifying a user the second that an artist that they love or that they follow has uploaded music, so being like, breaking news, an artist you love has new music out, that's better, right, than waiting around for the best time for them. Because as we've all gotten breaking news alerts on our phone, that was an example from the presentation, sometimes it's about meeting the user where they're at, but sometimes when you have like really hot goods, it's also good to, take advantage of enthusiasm. So parsing those two and sort of thinking about your strategy about how to talk to users and how to sort of leverage that kind of personalization on their behalf. It's a careful choice, but I think that there's a lot of benefit to be derived from it.
I love that because like anything else, it's contextual, right? Where does this work best, and where do we maybe need to continue to think in a certain way or in a more traditional way? So that's a fantastic example. Smeet, as you think about leveraging AI for personalization and why that is so critical in terms of today, in terms of scaling our ability to have those meaningful engagements, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, great question. So let's think about AI and what it can be used for, and where we, especially in financial services, are thinking. But it sounds like Charlie and Bob are implementing some of those elements as well. Now, AI can process vast quantity of data and make accurate predictions based on patterns that emerge from it. It can predict customer behavior. It can help identify and nurture those most valuable leads. We are also thinking of AI to hyper-personalize that experience by analyzing the customer profile. AI helps speed up the production of certain types of formats of content. AI powers the software that can decide what content to create and when to distribute it. So it becomes extremely critical for content creation and curation at scale. Now, Bob was mentioning, meaningful personalization, and Charlie gave an example as well. It applies to all industries. I'll give one example. So when we think about scenario-based personalization, members may be looking for an auto loan that they might be looking to buy several months from now without a clear idea of what they can afford and when, or they might be at the dealership looking to get a better rate on the spot. So it's very critical for us to do scenario-based personalization, identify and design the journeys based on every single step that the member can take. We pride ourselves on being savvy, selfless, and socially responsible at Align, and members expect that. So when they think about artificial intelligence or they think about personalization, what comes to mind for them is very different than how we might sometimes think from a perspective of revenue drivers. So for example, the more of a member's money and accounts we have, the more they expect us to provide them information in the form of advice, tailored offers, and credit decisioning.
Mm-hmm.
That meaningful conversation plays a key role. And this applies to good and bad scenarios. So like celebrating a win when somebody just pays off a loan, or a bad scenario where we might be letting them down gently when they're denied for a loan. And we have to balance that. And that's where it becomes very interesting how artificial intelligence plays a role in financial services.
I think that's a wonderful point, and it's a great point for life in general, right? Not everything is rainbows and butterflies, but how do we really in a transparent and honest and empathetic way communicate the not so great pieces that we might need to communicate, whether that's something like being denied for a loan or we got hacked and I'm so sorry that your information has been shared, right? There's always moments for any brand that things might not be optimal and we might need to share some unfortunate news. But I think that that's a wonderful example in how you need to think about it. Bob, why don't you jump in here as well and give us your perspectives on how AI can really be leveraged for greatest success?
I think really, I've always been a huge proponent of using data and the use of data, but data on its own can be interpreted in any million different ways. And it's really getting to the root of what that data means and how you can use that data. So we have a huge emphasis on collecting it, but actually disseminating truly actionable insights that impact your business is the difficult part and very time consuming. So the biggest thing that AI brings is time back to the business, where a lot of projects can be automated. So an example I could give is we just rolled out a on-air update for our wall ovens. So ovens that didn't have air fry technology before, a software update was available. Normally you'd roll out something like that and that would be the end of it. But with the use of AI, we're actually able to go back, disseminate who actually downloaded the update, and then solicit them for feedback and a review. Everybody knows that positive reviews are always really good for business, really good for promoting your product. So obviously a surprise and delight, like suddenly now you have this air fry feature where you didn't, now you're maximizing the use of that. And you wouldn't be able to do that manually for everything that you do across the business. AI brings automation to that and really improves business from a myriad of different angles. So can't say enough about integrating that into your marketing approach.
It's a really important point too that you're touching on, which is what are all of the different factors that come into play, right? It's not just, okay, I sent out this email and these people clicked on this link. Okay, but did they then do something else? What was the next step in their journey, right? Did they actually download the piece of software, right? And to be able to string all of those pieces together, to your point, Bob, it's impossible to do that. And even if we had the time to do it, we would be very delayed, right? And then throw out the door the real-time engagement, right? That's just not even close to being a possibility. And frankly, it is that expectation that consumers have today. So stringing in all of the different pieces of the puzzle. And I love your point too of like, there is no shortage of data, right? I love that little kind of meme or whatever you call it, going around LinkedIn of like the Legos scattered all over the ground. This is data, and then finally it builds into actually a beautiful cohesive picture. Like this is actually what we should be creating with this data, right? Because as I said earlier in the call, we have no shortage of data, but how do we actually create something meaningful from that data? In the few minutes that we have left, I would love to ask a very pressing question, because time and time again, what I find marketers struggle the most with is actually measuring the impact of their actions and their campaigns. We talked about this earlier in the presentation, that that's one of the big priorities for marketers today. So I would love for y'all to jump in and share with me any best practice nuggets that you would like to share with our audience in and around how to actually measure the impact of these campaigns through AI. Sumit, I saw you nodding, so I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, we think of it as a very simple framework, right? 3 questions. What is the marketing problem we are trying to solve using AI? Is there any missed opportunity or waste in the current approach? And then what is causing that missed opportunity? And how do we close that gap between AI prediction, decision, and business outcome? And if you just think very simply about that, what I would say is AI offers a competitive advantage to those who not only extract those important insights, but more importantly, those who can execute and measure its effects, and then react again and again. So we think of things like, I'll give an example, natural language processing, and also smart routing in calls. We are a digital-only financial institution, and members only can reach us through our digital channels or through our phone channels. And when they're reaching us through phone channels, we use AI, natural language processing. We try to do smart routing of calls, and we have to measure that right. We have to look at the first contact resolution, IVR containment, proper agent handling, what kind of callbacks might be resulting, tracking contacts from members across all channels, and then, of course, ensuring we have the right conversion tracking set up. And then from an acquisitions perspective, attribution models, and ensuring they work right, and they actually can showcase what the business outcome is and tie it back to our P&L.
Fantastic. Bob, over to you. What would you say for our audience, best practice?
I think really the one point that I would make is I would not look at AI as a replacement for something that you're already doing. Yeah, it will obviously do that and make things easier and faster. The big question that marketers should ask themselves is, what if? And we don't do enough of that because we get entrenched in our daily routine. The capacity of AI is just limitless. There's so many things that AI can answer, where you happen to be sitting around the boardroom one day and you're saying, wow, wouldn't that be great if we could do that? If you start expanding your creativity and you start thinking, AI is like having 1,000 hands doing something instead of one pair of hands. So if you start expanding the possibilities, you're going to come up with some really, really great approaches and uses of AI. And it's always good to look at other best practices around your industry or even out of your industry. So that would, for me, be a starting point for anybody.
Fantastic advice. Charlie?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things that any company can establish is what their key performance indicators are. And KPIs are not, they're not sort of just the general revenue or time spent in app and app cases. It's something very specific to what your service does, the value that it creates for the users who are on your platform. So then ultimately, when you launch any sort of marketing campaign, but also quite specifically in an AI campaign, if you're using something like machine learning, which is going to continually optimize against that success metric, and making sure that you have a success metric that really reflects what you do and where the value your users kind of understand your service to provide comes from. That is so clarifying for everything you do along the line. That means that you design messages, you design features, you design services which act in service to that success metric. But also it means that once you've completed a campaign or released a product, you can then look back at that very same metric and say to yourself, did people listen to more songs? Yes or no? That's what drives engagement. That's what drives retention. That's what defines our brand. And being able to unify yourself, sort of be more conclusive about what you're doing also allows you to make faster and faster decisions about what you should do next.
Yeah, that specificity is key. That's fantastic. Erin, I would love to have you close us out with just kind of bringing us back. We've gone through a presentation of best practice insights. We've heard from our incredible panelists.